Okay, so for those who just joined the recording, my name is Adam from Vectra, and I'm going to be demonstrating how we can integrate Jira and SpiraTeam together, or SpiraTest, it's the same. And I'll go through the integration, and at the end we can ask questions, and I'm happy to go through anything that needs more information. So just to start off with, to set the context, I've just RDP'd into a virtual machine we have here that's running Jira and SpiraTeam, although it could be SpiraTest, the integration is identical. And on one tab I have Jira running, and the other tab I have SpiraTeam. Okay. And they're on the same machine in this case, but they don't need to be, because basically we-integration is all done with web services, and so it could be on different machines. One could be cloud hosted, one could be on-premise. It doesn't make a difference. Okay. And so here's the Jira instance here on this URL. And then here's SpiraTeam. And what we did from a Spira setup standpoint is we've created a separate Jira project for the demonstration, but you can integrate as many projects as you like. And you can have different bug trackers integrated for different projects. So they could all use Jira. You could have some using Jira, some using Bugzilla, some using Spira's built-in bug tracker. It's entirely up to you how you want to configure it. It's very flexible.
Okay, so in case if I have two different projects, so I'll have to do a setup in administration for both of them?
What you do is you do the setup for one project, and then you'll basically copy that across for the other ones. So once you set up a project the way you like, you can use that as the basis for all your future projects.
Okay.
So don't worry. So when you go into administration in Spira, there's a couple of things I've already set up to save some time. So under data synchronization, the first thing I did is make sure there was a Jira entry. And typically the system installs with a Jira plugin. If it doesn't, you can add it, and then you might want to remove the ones you're not using, like Bugzilla and Mantis and FogBugs and so on. And then the other thing you'll do is go into the edit field, and that's where you need to make sure you have the connection to Jira. And that's what it looks like for our server. That's because it's an on-premise installation. If it was Jira on demand, it would be very similar, but it would be HTTPS, and it would have probably port 443 as the port it would use. And it supports HTTP or HTTPS. The other thing that's important is we do log into Jira using a single user, which means it only uses one named user on your licensing in Jira, which is nice. And that's the user that we're currently using. You just need to make sure this user does exist in Jira as well.
It doesn't need to be admin, right?
It doesn't need to be an admin. It just needs to be able to report issues, read issues, and if you want to have the version synchronized, it needs to be able to create versions as well.
Okay, any particular version of Jira or any version?
It works with Jira version 5 or later, and we have other plugins, older plugins that work with Jira 3 and 4, but for the most part, most of our customers are now using this one, which is the Jira 5 or later, which uses the REST API that comes with Jira 5, 6, and 7.
Okay, great. Just one
and the other thing we've set up is some custom fields. Yeah.
One more thing, do I need to all this plugin, or I just need to do a setup over here on the screen?
There's no plugin to add in Jira. You just simply go to the screen and set it up. And I'll show you what the other thing you have to do in just a second. So hold that question. And the other thing you can do is set up these configurations. These are depend on the different plugins. So for Jira, there's some settings in the manual. Typically, these are the only ones you'll need to set up by default, unless you want something special. What this does, number 6 just tells it the ID of any issue types in Jira that you want to come across as a requirement. We've configured it so that our user story in Jira comes across as a requirement rather than an incident or defect. Okay, and then the other thing is we have the ability to create associations and links in Jira. So when you create an issue and it's linked to a different issue, it will create the link for you. And this is just the name of the type of link that you want us to create. That's because Jira allows you to set up different link types, and so it just needs to be set to the name of the link. And this is usually right for most installations.
Okay.
But you can change it. And this is a global setup for all projects. And then for each project specifically, you're going to go back to the project mappings. And then for the current project, it takes from the drop-down here, so it's the current project. You tell it the name of the project in Jira. And when I say the name, it's really what's called the token. It's the short name that you have here that prefixes all of the D issues for that project.
Okay.
And that just tells it that this project in Spira equals that project in Jira. And the active flag means we're actually going to synchronize it. And if you have a project that perhaps is finished and not being used anymore, you can turn the active equal no, and that way it won't attempt to update it anymore. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah. So far so good.
Okay. Okay, great. And then the other thing you want to configure is the incident, the different fields that we have available, and we've set up some fields in the custom properties to illustrate how you can do that. Depending on what custom fields you've set up, you may have to do some of these or none of these. It depends on your Jira configuration. At the very least, though, you will almost always want to configure the statuses. These are the statuses in SpiraTest that we've configured for this sample, and we just simply point them at the equivalent IDs in Jira, so that it knows that a new issue in Jira and Spira are the same.
Okay, so like, where will I get the reference for external key? Is in Jira itself, or?
It's actually the primary key of the item. So in Jira, in the administration, you can get it from the IDs in the administration section. So you don't need to be an administrator to use synchronization, but for the setup, you need to have someone who's an administrator at the beginning to get the statuses and IDs. So it's all from here. I must say I'm not familiar with Jira where things get mixed up where things are. But basically you get the IDs from the various configuration screens where you set up the issue types and the issue statuses.
Okay.
And that's where you set it up. Let me have a look. Yeah, I don't remember the...
you need to go to administration.
That's right. Thanks. And you would go in here, and that's where you'll find the IDs. So, for example, statuses. These are the ones here. So these are the ID values. So you see it in the bottom of my browser. It says ID equal 1, ID equal 3, ID equal 4 on the status bar. That's where you get it from.
Okay.
Great. No. So going back to Spira, we did that for our statuses, and we'll do the same thing for our issue types. And you can set up different issue types in Spira, so many customers will just simply set the list to be exactly the same. So that bug enhancements, all those are the same in the two systems. The other things, now those are the only two that have to be set up. Everything else is optional. But for example, you might want to set up the priorities so that the priority values in Jira get set up correctly. And the other thing we set up was there are some built-in fields in Jira that you have, like, for example, environment. And you need to tell it that environment field corresponds to a custom property. So what we did is we went into SpiraTest and we actually added user-defined fields to match some of the Jira fields that could be both standard or custom. So for example, if I go into here and choose incident, these are the custom fields we added to our Spira installation. We added some custom fields like a date field, a free text, a multi-select, a single select, a user drop-down list. And then we added the component field for Jira's components. We added the environment field, the resolution, and we added some other things as well. So these are just some examples of how you can have the custom field for the two systems be integrated, so that when you change something in Jira, it's going to update the corresponding field in Spira, if you wish. And you only need to map the fields that you want to integrate. If there are fields in Jira that you don't really care about seeing in SpiraTest, you don't have to map those. It's just the ones that are required or the ones that you need to see in both systems.
Okay.
Great. And so once you set that up, just to go back into data synchronization, as an example, when you have the environment field, let's say the resolution field, the components, that's how you set them up. You tell it that the component field is corresponding to the built-in Jira field, and these are some values that we have. It's just a way of mapping the data together.
Okay.
And it's all described in our administration guide. Definitely if you have questions, you can contact our support team and they're happy to answer any questions you have. But it's all fairly straightforward, and the manual does have screenshots of each of these screens and examples of what data goes in each one. But it's all done through the user interface. There's no config files you can mess with.
Okay.
So that's basically the setup. The only other thing you do is, depending on how your Jira and Spira are deployed, if your Spira is on-premise, then you'll typically use this built-in data synchronization service, and that runs on the server that the SpiraTeam sits on, and it's going to communicate to Jira. If you're using our cloud service, it's a little bit different, but basically it's just a different place the service runs, but the actual synchronization is identical otherwise. And so normally,
can we set up a particular time of the day at which it automatically synchronizes you?
Sure. It's actually going to run every 2 minutes.
Okay.
So it runs all the time. You can actually configure the interval if you wish to be something different, but most people would typically have it running on a 2 or 3 minute interval. That way, to the end user, it feels like it's continuous.
Okay.
And it's designed to only pull the most recent changes, so that way it can run all the time. It doesn't put a significant load, because it's not asking the systems for everything. It's only asking for everything that happened since the last time it ran, in the last 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay.
And so to actually use the system, you'll just switch the service on, and that starts the synchronization. And on a production box, you'd have it running all the time. And now when you go into data synchronization, you will see that you have the last sync date and time, and that was a few minutes ago, and that is constantly going to be updated. And it will display a success, or it will display a failure if there's some kind of configuration. For example, if Jira is down, you may show failure. And you can always view the errors at any time by clicking on this view error box, and that will show you what's going on. Now we've got this particular server running in trace mode, so it's showing you exactly what's going on, because it's helpful for people. Normally on a production box you have it running without the trace logging, so these information and success audits wouldn't be displayed, just the warnings and errors.
Okay. So this is for on-premise Spira.
Yep.
And what about cloud hosted? Is it the same, or?
It's very similar. It's very similar. The only difference is the synchronization is initiated external to Spira. We have a plugin you can run on another machine, and we're going to be having a hosted service that will actually connect to Spira and Jira for you. But the actual configuration is set up, the logging, everything else is identical apart from where the service itself runs.
Okay.
And we can provide more information if you need about the different options. So that's the setup you would do. And then what would happen is, let's say, we'll start very simply. Let's say we're going to go run a test. So I go to testing test cases. And I'm going to basically run one test and log a defect. So let's execute this one. And that's the release. We're going to run it against version 1 of our system. Hit next. And let's look. So we're supposed to click on a link, and the home page is displayed. Let's pass the first step. And the second step, let's log a failure. So failed with an error message. And we'll attach a screenshot, perhaps. No. Plugin running. Let me just use. I'll browse to the image I have. So I'm attaching a sample image, map it to screenshot, and there you go, being attached, and then we'll log the defect. Now these various fields like multi-select, custom user environment, these are all the custom fields we set up, and they usually illustrate the kinds of fields that we can synchronize. Typically in a real system you wouldn't have quite as many fields as that. So we'll log a bug, error on home page, and everything else is optional, so we can leave it blank for now, or we can set the priority perhaps. And that will do, and we'll now hit the fail button, and that's going to fail the step, and it's logged the defect. So now if we go into Spira, we'll see the defect. And I'm sorting it by most recent, and there it is. And when it first gets created, it's going to be the new status, and you'll see that this Jira field is blank. That's where we're going to store the ID of the Jira issue when it gets created. So you'll know the synchronization has succeeded for this item, and that ID gets populated automatically. It also serves as a reference between the item in Spira and the item in Jira. And if we go back to Jira, we'll be able to see what it appears by going back to the home page. And we'll look for issues. Recent issues. Let's have a look. Search for issues. Let's do all issues and I'll sort it by date. Okay. And then what will happen is in the background that service is going to run. We can check how quickly that's happening by going to the administration and then going to data synchronization. I'll move that away. And so it's going to run every 3 or 4 minutes. So what we can do is we can expedite it for a demo by just restarting it, and that will tell the read to rerun it immediately. In a production box, you would just leave it run. And just give it a few seconds for it to work. And there we go, there's our new issue in Jira. And if you'll notice, it's copied the description, the expected result, the actual result, and the steps from Spira. So we have a nice picture of what happens. The tester has reported what happened. The developer can see this, what they're supposed to have happened, what actually happened, and there's also a screenshot. And that was the image I attached. It was a load testing graph. So that's all here, so that's nice. And there's a link back to the SpiraTest issue, there's a link to the requirement in Spira, and there's a link to the test run. So that way the developer doesn't have to go search for everything, it's right at fingertips, or her fingertips. And similarly, if I go back to Spira and do a refresh, the status has changed to open, and the Jira ID has been pre-populated automatically. And if I go into the history tab and do a refresh, you'll see that it will reflect the Jira changes. So that way, we have a history of all the changes made in either system from the synchronization as well as made by the user. And so, if I go back into Jira, let's say I'm going to add a comment or resolve it perhaps. Maybe I'll assign it. So I'll assign it to me, assigning to myself, fix. I'll hit assign. Oh, it's already assigned to me. So let me just do something different. Let me add a comment. Okay, so I added a comment. And maybe I could edit it. I can resolve it. I fixed it in version 1.1. That's fine. Great. So now that we've changed the status, and if we go back into Spira, we can, when it synchronizes again, it's going to update. So again, we can wait for the synchronization to happen, or because this is a demo, we can just restart it. Let me just see. It may run again. So refresh. Yep, it actually did already, so that's good. So now it's marked as resolved, and the comment will be added. And if I go back into my history tab and refresh that, again, the history is reflecting what changes have occurred. So that way you can do the initial logging in Spira, and it appears in Jira, and then you can make all the updates in Jira and work on the bug in Jira, and it flows back in. Any questions so far?
Is it the other way also? Like we are currently using Jira for logging defects. So if I already have a defect log in Jira and I want to link it to a particular test case, is that possible?
Absolutely. So let's go back to Jira, and we'll do the exact same thing in reverse. So we'll go here, and we'll create an issue, and we'll call it test issue from Jira, and we'll assign it to version 1, let's say. Assign it to anyone, that's fine. Yes, create, that's good. That's been created, and as I go back into Spira, I'll go back to the tracking page and refresh. As I go back to I can check again the synchronization. It hasn't run yet, it's 8:54. So I'll just go and speed it along by doing a restart. And again, that's just to save time with today's demo. In real life, you could just wait 2 minutes, it'll be done. It's running right now, great. Do a refresh, and there we go, there's the one from Jira. And the environment's picked up, the version's picked up, any of the fields I wanted to set will be picked up as well. And the attachments will be there, and there's a link to Jira. So we do provide a link in the opposite direction, so that's a link to the Jira issue. So that way the tester in SpiraTest can navigate quickly to Jira as well. So the links are added in both directions.
Okay.
And so that way you've got a bidirectional, ability to log a defect. Once the defect is logged in both systems and it's synchronized, then at that point you can then make the changes in Jira and it will flow into SpiraTest. And the other thing you can do is you can log an issue in Jira as a user story, and it will come across in as a requirement as well. So, for example, I've done that before. If I go into planning requirements, you'll see here are some user stories that have come across from Jira automatically. And it works the same way. All we did is simply make those a story type, and then they come into the requirements module rather than the defect module. So if I go here, you can see all defects. A second, and then the user stories are right there. Yep, there we go. So these are some of the user stories, and these are the ones that then came across into Jira here, into SpiraTest.